In 1535, a blacksmith's son from Putney controlled the King of England, dissolved 12 centuries of church law, executed the most powerful men in the realm, and seized a land portfolio worth more than the entire Tudor treasury. And when Henry VII finally understood what had really happened, it was already too late by years to undo any of it. They called it the Reformation. It was a takeover, and the man who ran it never held the crown. He never needed to. If you're new here, subscribe. We cover history's greatest power plays like nobody else does. Now Putney, 1485. The Thames smells like rot and ambition in equal measure along the Putney riverbank in the final decade of the 15th century. It is 1490-something, give or take, and nobody bothered to record the exact birth year of Walter Cromwell's boy. That detail, that specific absence in the historical record, tells you everything you need to know about where Thomas Cromwell started. He was nobody. Legally, economically, socially, nobody. A name not worth noting down. His father, Walter, works a forge on the south bank of the river and runs a small alehouse from the same property, the kind of establishment that respectable men walk past quickly and only enter when desperate, when cold, when the coins in their pocket are too few to afford a better option. The forge is Walter's real business. Iron work, horseshoes, hinges, the anonymous metal objects that hold a world together without anyone ever thinking about who made them. This is the first room Thomas Cromwell ever knows. Low ceiling, soot-blackened beams, the smell of hot metal and doused fires, and the particular sourness of ale barrels never quite cleaned between batches. Walter Cromwell is not a cruel man, but he is a rough one, and the distinction matters less than you might think to a boy growing up in his household. He is hauled before local courts repeatedly across his lifetime, for allowing illegal gaming, for operating an unlicensed alehouse, for various disputes involving grazing rights and land boundaries that speak to a man constantly pressing against the limits of what his station allows him. He is ambitious in the small, grinding way that people without access to real power are ambitious, constantly fighting for inches. His son watches all of this. His son watches everything. Young Thomas is compact, dark-eyed, unnervingly still for a boy growing up in a forge. He has the quality, visible even in later portraits where Holbein catches it precisely, of a man who is never quite where his body is. He is always slightly ahead of the room, processing, calculating, running the variables. The forge teaches him something that Eton and Oxford will never teach the aristocrats who will one day despise him from across the Privy Council table, that every structure, no matter how massive, has a stress point. A place where if you apply the right force at the right angle it bends. His father bends iron, Thomas will learn to bend institutions. The principle is identical. By the time Thomas is a teenager, he has already committed what the English ruling class will later consider an act of social violence. He is left. Not legally, not with permission from anyone whose permission was required, not with a plan that carries anyone else's blessing. He simply vanishes from Putney one morning, crosses the channel, and enters the world. The year is approximately 1503. He is somewhere between 16 and 20 years old. The historical record, as we've noted, is not interested in him yet. He has no connections, no letters of introduction, no patron waiting on the other side. He has exactly one asset, the ability to read men faster than they can read him. He surfaces first in France, and then in Italy, Florence specifically, which in the early 16th century is the nerve center of everything the modern world will eventually become. Finance, art, political theory. The Medici have spent 2 generations turning money into a science and simultaneously a weapon, and their city hums with the particular energy of a place that has decided ideas are the most valuable commodity in existence. Cromwell does not study at anyone's feet in any formal sense. He is not enrolled anywhere. He works. He fights. There is a credible historical tradition, not legend, credible, that he served as a soldier in the Italian wars, specifically in the chaotic campaigns of the French army in northern Italy around 1503 to 1504. Think about what this means. A teenager from a South London forge fighting as a mercenary in the most politically complex military theater in the known world. The Italian campaigns of this period are not clean frontline wars. They are occupations and counter-occupations, sieges and betrayals, shifting alliances and broken promises, where the man who survives is not necessarily the strongest fighter but the one who can read the situation fast enough to pick the winning side before the winning side is obvious. Cromwell survives. He always survives. He is learning that power rarely lives where the official title says it does. The man holding the sword is rarely the man winning the war. The man winning the war is usually the man who decided 3 moves ago where the sword would be pointing. Then Antwerp? This is the most important stop, though it is the one historians most often rush past. The financial capital of the northern European world in the early 16th century, Antwerp is where the mechanisms of the modern economy are being invented in real time. The Bourse, the world's first proper stock exchange, operating in the shadow of the cathedral, is where bills of exchange circulate, where letters of credit are honored across national boundaries, where the price of English wool determines whether German bankers extend credit to Spanish monarchs who are funding wars in Italy. It is a system of almost incomprehensible complexity, and it runs on information, on trust measured in paper, on the precise legal language of financial instruments. Cromwell finds employment with English merchants operating in this system. He is learning at the most practical possible level how money moves, not how to make money in the retail sense, not leisurekeeping or shopkeeping, but how capital flows between courts, how debts create leverage, how the man who controls the paperwork and the legal language of a transaction controls its outcome regardless of who holds the nominal title to the assets involved. He is, without knowing it yet, developing the intellectual framework for everything he will do to England 30 years later. In Antwerp, he learns that the most important room in any institution is not the throne room, it is the records room. He returns to England around 1513 in his late 20s, a man barely recognizable as the forge boy from Putney. He speaks Italian with enough fluency to have conducted business in it. He speaks French. He understands Flemish commercial law and its practical applications. He has fought wars and survived them, which means he has also watched men die badly for causes that turned out to be wrong, which is its own education. He gets himself called to the bar, becomes a lawyer, and begins building a client list in the wool trade, one of the primary financial engines of the early Tudor economy. He is not yet powerful, but he is becoming known as the kind of man who solves problems that other men cannot solve, who finds angles that other men cannot see. And that reputation eventually reaches a cardinal. Thomas Wolsey is the most powerful man in England who is not Henry VII, and on any given day the distinction may be largely semantic. He is Lord Chancellor, Archbishop of York, Cardinal of Rome, Papal Legate. He runs English foreign policy, domestic policy, and ecclesiastical policy simultaneously, holding all of it together through an arrogance so complete and so functional that it has become its own kind of elegance. He also grew up as a butcher's son in Ipswich, and this matters enormously. Wolsey recognizes something in Cromwell's eyes, the particular hunger of a man who built himself from below, who has never coasted on a family name, who knows that his position is always provisional and therefore always treats it as something to be actively defended and expanded. He brings Cromwell into his household, and this is where the real education begins. Wolsey's household is not merely an administrative body. It is a shadow government, arguably the real government of England in the 1520s, running intelligence operations, managing diplomatic correspondence across half of Europe, processing land transactions, brokering appointments to every significant office in the English church. Cromwell positions himself within a few years at the operational center of this machine, not the visible center. Never the visible center, he understands instinctively that visibility is vulnerability. He is the man behind the throne, and he is cataloging everything, every pressure point in the English state, every legal mechanism, every institutional vulnerability, every place where the official story and the real story diverge. He is building a map. He is not yet sure what he will use it for. But a man who grew up watching his father fight for inches against a system that was never designed to give him anything, that man always keeps a map. There is a specific kind of intelligence that the English ruling class of the 16th century simply does not possess because they have never needed it. They inherit power. They maintain it through social ritual and family connection and the threat of violence, all of which have been reliable tools for 400 years and show no sign of failing. Thomas Cromwell has none of these tools. This deficit forces him to develop something more sophisticated and ultimately more dangerous. Skill 1: Reading institutional weakness. In Wolsey's service, Cromwell processes thousands of legal documents over a decade: land transactions, church appointments, diplomatic negotiations, tax assessments, monastery visitation reports. He develops what can only be described as an almost supernatural ability to identify the gap between what a document says and what the underlying reality is. Every institution generates paperwork, and paperwork always tells the truth if you understand the specific lies it is designed to tell. The Church of England, Cromwell notices early and notices often, is held together not by theology but by property law. The abbeys, the priories, the cathedral estates, their spiritual authority and their temporal authority are fused. The moment you can separate them legally, the whole structure becomes renegotiable. And property law is something Cromwell understands better than any bishop in the country. He files this observation away. He will need it. Skill 2: Weaponizing Parliament. Most powerful men of the early Tudor era experience Parliament as a nuisance, a body that needs to be periodically managed, occasionally bribed, sometimes ignored. They see it the way medieval lords see peasants, a fact of life to be dealt with rather than a tool to be used. Cromwell sees it differently. He gets himself elected to Parliament in 1523 and studies its procedures the way a forger studies currency, obsessively, exhaustively, looking for the precise points where form can be made to serve any purpose you need. He discovers that Parliament, properly handled, is a machine for manufacturing legitimacy. You do not need to convince men to agree with something. You need to structure the choice so that agreement is the only option they can see in the time available to them. Skill 3. Controlling the information architecture. Wolsey runs England's foreign intelligence operation, and Cromwell works within it long enough to internalize a principle that will define his career. Information is not just useful. Information is the primary raw material of power, more fundamental than money, more reliable than loyalty. He begins, quietly and methodically, building a personal intelligence network that operates in parallel to Wolsey's. Informants inside monasteries who report on the mood of the abbots, merchants in Antwerp who note what ships arrive from Rome and who receives the dispatches, contacts in the legal profession who hear what is being discussed in the Inns of Court. By the time Cromwell reaches his full power, he will be receiving intelligence reports from across England and from half of Europe. He will know what his enemies are planning before they have finished planning it. This is not paranoia. This is architecture. This is what it looks like when a man who grew up with nothing decides to build walls. Skill 4. Surviving catastrophic failure. In 1529, Wolsey falls. The fall is sudden and total, the kind of collapse that seems impossible one week and inevitable the next. The man who appeared as permanent as the English landscape is stripped of his offices, Lord Chancellorship, his palaces, his access to the king, and he dies in November 1530 on the road to London, on his way to face a treason trial that would almost certainly have ended with his execution. Most men who are as embedded in a disgraced patron's operation as Cromwell is in Wolsey's simply go down with the ship. It is the Tudor version of guilt by association, and it is nearly absolute. Cromwell does not go down. The mechanism by which he survives is itself a masterclass in crisis management under pressure. He is reported to have wept openly when he heard of Wolsey's arrest, genuinely, apparently, which is notable because Cromwell does not, as a rule, perform emotions he does not feel. But within weeks, he has pivoted with a speed that leaves observers uncertain whether he was ever truly Wolsey's man at all, or whether his loyalty to the cardinal was always a means to an end that now requires a different means. He presents himself to the king's inner circle not as a Wolsey loyalist to be purged, but as an operational asset to be acquired. He has information. He has capability. He has a specific and demonstrable skill set that the king's other advisors conspicuously lack. He is offering a service. Henry buys it. The lesson Cromwell takes from this: loyalty is a costume. You wear it when it serves the project. You change clothes when the project requires. The crisis that opens the door for Cromwell is not, on its surface, political. It is romantic, domestic, almost absurd in how personal it is for a situation that will reshape half of Europe. Henry VIII wants to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. He wants Anne Boleyn, who is young and electric and refuses to sleep with him outside of marriage. He wants a male heir, because his only surviving legitimate child is a daughter, and Tudor England in 1529 has never had a ruling queen and is not confident it can survive one. He has been petitioning Rome for the annulment for 6 years, sending delegations, presenting legal arguments, applying diplomatic pressure, and getting back from Rome an endless sequence of procedural delays that amount to a polite, institutional no. The reason for the no is not theological, though theology is the language in which it is expressed. The reason is political. Catherine of Aragon is the aunt of Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, King of Spain, ruler of the Americas and the Netherlands, the most powerful man in the world in 1529. His armies have already sacked Rome once in 1527, and the Pope Clement VII is still, in a very practical sense, Charles's prisoner. Clement is not going to annul Catherine's marriage for Henry's convenience. He would rather stall until he dies, and he is quite good at stalling. Everyone in Henry's court experiences this as a problem in diplomacy and theology. Cromwell experiences it as an opening in property law and constitutional theory. Here is what he sees, with the clarity of a man who spent years in Antwerp learning how systems actually work beneath their official surfaces. If Henry cannot get what he wants from Rome, the solution is not to keep asking Rome. The solution is to make Rome legally irrelevant to England. And if Rome is legally irrelevant to England, if the Pope's authority over English ecclesiastical affairs can be argued away by statute, then the entire infrastructure that Rome's authority rests on becomes suddenly available for redistribution. The monasteries, the church courts, the right to appoint bishops, the flow of taxation from English parishes to Rome, all of it, centuries of accumulated power and property suddenly in play. Cromwell enters Henry's council in 1531. By the following year he is its dominant operational force. He has the tools he built in Antwerp. He has the legal map he drew in Wolsey's service. He has the parliamentary muscle he has been developing since 1523. He is a king whose desperation is so complete that he will authorize almost anything that promises relief from the trap he is in. He has a legal theory not yet fully formed but forming that is so elegant, so precisely calibrated to Henry's vanity and England's interests and the specific vulnerabilities of the Church's legal position that when it arrives fully assembled it will be almost impossible to argue against. He just needs to finish building it. He builds fast. He always builds fast. The window, he knows, will not stay open. Move 1. Cut the legal wire. The mechanism is elegant in the particular way that all great institutional weapons are elegant, not simple, but precise. Cromwell's research team surfaces an obscure medieval legal doctrine called praemunire. The technical substance. English kings have always possessed supreme authority within England, and the Pope's claim to override English ecclesiastical law has always been, in this reading, a usurpation, an ancient theft of royal authority that predates the current dispute by centuries. Henry is therefore not breaking with Rome. He is recovering what was always rightfully his. The framing is brilliant because it requires Henry to do the one thing that comes most naturally to him, believe that what he wants is also what he deserves, and that anyone standing between him and it is committing an injustice. Cromwell drafts the submission of the clergy in 1532. This document, which the English church hierarchy signs in a single afternoon, is the most consequential piece of ecclesiastical legislation in English history, and it is worth pausing to understand precisely what it does. It makes the Church of England's canon law, the internal legal system by which the Church governs itself, subject to royal approval. No new canon law can be created without the king's permission. Existing canon law can be reviewed and overturned by a royal commission. The Church retains its property, its courts, its liturgy, its personnel, but it surrenders in one document its claim to operate as an independent legal jurisdiction. It becomes, from this moment, a department of the Crown. The bishops sign because Cromwell has constructed the alternative with precision. To refuse to sign is to admit that they have been illegally submitting to papal authority, an authority the praemunire doctrine defines as a usurpation of royal power. To refuse is therefore to confess to treason. The choice is, sign away your independence or face prosecution for a crime whose logic you cannot publicly dispute without challenging the entire constitutional framework of the realm. They sign. Thomas More, watching from the outside, resigns as Lord Chancellor the following day. He is one of perhaps 3 men in England who fully understands what the signature of the English bishops actually means. He will be dead within 3 years. Move 2. Build the legislature into a weapon. Between 1532 and 1534, Cromwell manages through Parliament a sequence of statutes that, examined individually, each seem like modest constitutional adjustments, and examined together constitute the most radical restructuring of the English state since the Norman Conquest. The Act and Restraint of Appeals, 1533. No English subject may appeal any legal matter to Rome. The Church of England is legally sealed from papal jurisdiction in a single clause. The Act of Supremacy, 1534. Henry is declared supreme head of the Church of England. This is not merely a title. It is a legal definition that places the entire institutional apparatus of the English Church under the authority of the English Crown. The Treason Act, also 1534, Cromwell's personal masterpiece of preventive law. It becomes a capital felony to deny the royal supremacy, in speech, in writing, possibly even in thought expressed aloud to another person. The crime of opinion, the execution of conscience. He runs Parliament the way a skilled foreman runs a workshop, controlling what materials arrive in what order on what timeline, ensuring that by the time any individual piece reaches the floor for consideration, the outcome has already been determined by the arrangement of everything around it. Members who might organize opposition find themselves outmaneuvered before they can organize. The sequencing is everything. He moves faster than resistance can cohere. By the time anyone outside Cromwell's immediate circle fully understands what the Reformation Parliament has done, it has already done it, and the institutional architecture of England has been permanently rearranged. Move 3. Monetize the asset. The Church of England, at the moment Cromwell assumes effective control of it as the king's viceregent in spirituals, a title with no medieval precedent, essentially inventing a new office to give himself authority over an institution that never previously answered to a layman, owns somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of all productive land in England. The monasteries alone hold hundreds of estates across every county in the country, accumulated over 12 centuries through bequests, inheritance, purchase, and occasional straightforward seizure from people who could not resist them. It is by any measure the largest consolidated land portfolio in the kingdom, and it generates annual income, rents, tithes, tolls, fishpond revenues, mill rights, timber rights, that dwarfs the crown's own receipts. In 1535, Cromwell commissions the Valor Ecclesiasticus, the most comprehensive institutional survey of England since William the Conqueror's Doomsday Book of 1086. His commissioners fan out across every county, entering every monastic establishment in the country and documenting with forensic thoroughness the value of its assets, the silver plate, the livestock, the annual rental income from its estates, the number of monks and their individual stipends. The state of the buildings, the productivity of the land. The official justification is moral reform. There are reports of corruption and licentiousness in the monasteries, and the king is merely investigating whether these institutions are fulfilling their spiritual purpose. The actual purpose of the Valor Ecclesiasticus is a property inventory. You cannot sell what you have not counted. Cromwell is counting. Move 4. Sell the crown a future it cannot refuse. Henry VIII is structurally and almost constitutionally always short of money. Wars are expensive. His palaces are expensive. His court is expensive. The machinery of Tudor governance is expensive and growing more so. The royal finances are perpetually stretched, and the traditional mechanisms for supplementing them, parliamentary taxation, forced loans from wealthy subjects, are slow, politically costly, and yield limited returns. Cromwell presents the dissolution of the monasteries not as a religious revolution, not as a theological statement, not even as a political consolidation, all of which it is, but as a financial rescue package. He's giving the king hundreds of productive estates generating reliable annual income, plus the extraordinary one-time windfall of stripping 800 establishments of centuries of accumulated treasure. Gold plate, silver candlesticks, jeweled reliquaries. Timber from the monastic forests, lead from the monastery roofs stripped and sold. Stone from the buildings themselves, hauled away for use in the new gentry houses that will begin to dot the English countryside within a generation. Henry does not have to care about the theology. He does not have to wrestle with the morality of dissolving institutions that have provided education and health care and poor relief for the communities around them for centuries. He just has to sign the orders, and Henry signed. Between 1536 and 1540, Cromwell oversees the dissolution of over 800 monastic establishments. The mathematics are staggering. The land alone, transferred to the crown and then rapidly sold or granted to favored courtiers, represents the largest single transfer of property in England since 1066. Entire communities are dispersed, the monks and nuns given small pensions worth less than a London laborer's annual wage, and released into a world that has no infrastructure to absorb them. Libraries containing some of the greatest collections of manuscripts in Northern Europe are destroyed. Illuminated books burned for their covers, buildings stripped to their foundations. The physical record of 8 centuries of English monastic culture dismantled in 4 years. And Cromwell is managing every transaction, every sale, every grant, every pension negotiation. He is running the largest institutional liquidation in English history from his office in Austin Friars, working 15-hour days, personally reviewing the paperwork. He does not flinch, he does not hesitate, he does not lose sleep. He has long since made his calculation about the relationship between large projects and human cost, and he has accepted it with the equanimity of a man who grew up watching iron bent by force. The plan nearly collapses in the autumn of 1536. Not from Rome, whose excommunication of Henry has already been absorbed, not from the emperor whose threatened invasion has not materialized, not from the conservative faction at court which is watching and waiting but not yet ready to move, from the English north, from farmers and craftsmen and village priests who walk out of their doors one morning and begin marching south. The Pilgrimage of Grace is the largest popular uprising in Tudor England, a movement that at its peak draws somewhere around 40,000 people from Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, Cumberland and the surrounding counties. They are not rebels in any of the ways the Tudor state is prepared to deal with. They are not foreign-backed. They are not aristocratic conspiracy. They are not a failed harvest driving starving people to desperation. They are a mass movement of ordinarily law-abiding English people who have watched their world being systematically demolished and who are saying in the clearest language available to them, "Stop." They march under the banner of the 5 wounds of Christ. They want the restoration of the monasteries. They want the heretics driven from the King's Council. And they want, by name, Thomas Cromwell. Henry, capable of genuine courage in battle but also capable of fear on a geological scale, wants to negotiate. He sends messengers. He makes concessions in principle. Cromwell, watching with cold precision, counsels patience and strategic deception. He recommends the king issue promises. The dissolution will pause, grievances will be heard, a parliament called in the north. The promises are real enough to be believed. The moment the movement dissipates and its leaders return home trusting in royal mercy, Cromwell recommends the executions. Approximately 200 people are killed in the aftermath of the Pilgrimage of Grace. They are hanged in their home villages, along the specific roads they marched, in locations chosen deliberately for maximum visibility to the communities that watched them pass. Robert Aske, the lawyer who became the uprising's charismatic leader, a man of genuine intelligence and genuine faith who genuinely believed that the king would honor his promises, is hanged in chains at York. The chains mean he is not simply hanged and quickly dead. He is suspended in an iron cage exposed to the weather until his body fails. It takes days. It is designed to be seen. It is designed to be remembered. But here is what no one tells you about the pilgrimage of grace. The rebels' central demand, their specific named demand, the one that appears most prominently in the articles they present to the king's commissioners, is not the restoration of the monasteries. It is not even the reversal of the break with Rome. It is the removal of Thomas Cromwell from the king's council. They want him handed over to them as the architect of everything that is destroying their world. They are not wrong. They have identified the operational reality of the regime with remarkable accuracy. Henry has approved the dissolution enthusiastically. But the intellectual architecture, the legal mechanism, the administrative management, the specific shape of the English Reformation, all of it comes from Cromwell's desk. The rebels understand this better than most of the English ruling class does. They cannot stop it, but they know whose hands are on the machinery. The real danger after the pilgrimage is crushed is not another uprising. The real danger is the faction at court that has been watching Cromwell survive, watching him grow stronger from the crisis rather than weaker, watching the king's dependence on him deepen, and calculating with the patience that comes from knowing they have time that a man this powerful will eventually make a mistake they can use. The Howards, the Duke of Norfolk. The conservative Catholic faction that has never accepted, not for a single day, that a blacksmith's son from Putney should sit above them in the Council of England. They are watching. They are filing everything away, and the end of the pilgrimage gives them something very specific, evidence that Cromwell recommended deliberate deception toward English subjects, evidence they will not use yet, but will keep. By 1539, Thomas Cromwell holds more institutional titles simultaneously than any non-royal figure in English history since before the conquest. Lord Privy Seal, Viceregent in Spirituals, his own invented office with no precedent, making him the king's personal deputy over the entire English church. Vicar General, Lord Great Chamberlain. He is managing the dissolution, the redistribution of monastic assets, the enforcement of the religious settlement, English foreign policy, and the day-to-day operations of the Privy Council, all from Austin Friars, all simultaneously, running the country with the focused intensity of a man who knows the window could close at any moment and has never once allowed himself to slow down. And he is alone. This is the flaw. This is the thing that Thomas Cromwell, who can read every other human being in England with terrifying accuracy and speed, cannot see in himself. He has no allies, only instruments, no friends, only employees. Every relationship he maintains is explicitly transactional, built on mutual utility rather than genuine connection, because genuine connection requires trust and trust requires vulnerability, and Cromwell cannot afford vulnerability. The result is that his network, which is vast and efficient and admirably designed, has no depth. There is no one in it who is positioned to step between him and catastrophe if catastrophe arrives, because no one in it owes him anything more than the service he is currently paying for. The ticking clock arrives in the form of a marriage. Anne of Cleves, Henry's fourth wife, selected by Cromwell in 1539 as a diplomatic alliance with the Protestant princes of northern Germany. The portraits are favorable. The diplomatic rationale is sound. The strategic logic is impeccable, exactly the kind of long-horizon thinking that has defined Cromwell's career. And Henry, who has been eagerly anticipating his new bride's arrival, rides out to meet her in disguise at Rochester on New Year's Day 1540, a romantic gesture, and is catastrophically, immediately, physically repulsed. He calls her in private a Flanders mare. He cannot consummate the marriage. He spends the weeks following the wedding in a state of furious humiliation, looking for someone to blame and settling, as he almost always settles, on the person who recommended the policy. He blames Cromwell. The Howard faction, watching their opportunity open like a gap in a line of battle, moves quickly. Norfolk introduces Henry to his niece, Catherine Howard, 17 years old, trained from childhood for exactly this purpose, presented at exactly the right moment. Henry falls, hard and fast, the way only a lonely, vain, aging man can fall for a very young woman who has been specifically prepared to attract him. Cromwell is now facing a threat that none of his tools can address. He cannot draft a statute that changes how Henry feels when he looks at Anne of Cleves. He cannot run an intelligence operation against the king's libido. He cannot outmaneuver the Howard family in the one arena where they have complete advantage, the management of a young woman's access to the king's private hours. For the first time in his operational career, Thomas Cromwell has encountered a problem he built no instrument to solve. He is operating on time he does not have, with resources that cannot reach the actual problem, watching the closing of a trap he helped set by building a state powerful enough to destroy anyone the king points it at. Step back, account for what Cromwell has actually constructed between 1532 and 1540, 8 years. He has severed England from the Roman Catholic Church, an institution that has shaped every dimension of English life for 900 years. He has done this not through war, not through popular revolt, not through theological revolution from below, but through a sequence of parliamentary statutes drafted so carefully and implemented so quickly that by the time the full scope of what has happened is visible, it is irreversible. He has dissolved over 800 monastic establishments and redistributed their land, the largest single transfer of property in England since William the Conqueror parceled out the country after Hastings. He has created from essentially nothing the machinery of a modern bureaucratic state, the Privy Council operating with formal meeting procedures and written records, the Secretary of State's office processing correspondence from a defined institutional position rather than as a personal royal household appointment. He has passed through Parliament statutes so constitutionally fundamental that English law will cite them for the next 400 years. He has also in the process killed people, not in the incidental way that powerful people kill, not through neglect, not through the side effects of policy, but directly personally by design. Thomas More, the most respected humanist in Europe, executed in July 1535 for refusing to swear the oath acknowledging the royal supremacy. John Fisher, the Bishop of Rochester, 76 years old and too ill to stand properly at his trial, executed in the same month. The abbots of Glastonbury, Colchester and Reading, men who resisted the dissolution of their establishments, executed for treason on evidence. Cromwell's commissioners assembled under conditions that no honest court would have accepted. The leaders of the Pilgrimage of Grace, the monks of the London Charterhouse, hung, drawn and quartered in a sequence spread across months, specifically to maximize the duration of public horror. Cromwell signs the warrants. Cromwell drafts the charges. He is not a sadist. Nothing in the historical record suggests he enjoys any of this. But he has made the calculation at some point before any of this begins that the project has a cost, that the cost includes a specific quantity of death, and that he will pay it because the project is worth it. And he never revisits that calculation. He never allows himself to revisit it because a man who revisits it cannot continue, and continuing is everything. But here is what no one tells you about Thomas Cromwell at the absolute height of his power in 1539, when he holds more offices than any previous English commoner, and is running a country of 4 million people from a desk in Austin Friars. He is not doing this for Henry. He has probably not been doing it for Henry for years. The evidence, his letters, the pattern of his institutional choices, the specific shape of the offices he creates and the powers he reserves to them, all of it points to a man with a vision of England that goes substantially beyond anything Henry has articulated or, quite possibly, understood. Cromwell's England is a centralized, professionally administered state with the crown as its formal and symbolic apex, but the permanent administrative class as its real operating system. A state that runs on procedure and paper rather than on the personal authority of the monarch. Henry is not Cromwell's employer in any meaningful sense. Henry is Cromwell's instrument. The king who thinks he is being served is, in fact, being used to build something that will outlast him, outpower him, and ultimately make his descendants largely ceremonial. And this is the moment to confront what has actually happened to Thomas Cromwell across the 8 years of the Reformation. The underdog is gone. The man who understood power because he had none of it, the forge boy who mapped institutions from the outside because he could not get inside, has become something he would once have studied with clinical detachment. He is the system. He is the establishment. He's exactly the kind of power structure that a clever outsider maps for eventual dismantling. He has not noticed this transition, which is itself the most dangerous thing about it. He is lonely in the way that only the genuinely powerful can be lonely, completely insulated from any experience that might destabilize the machine. The boy who had nothing has become the minister who has everything and discovered that everything and nothing produce the same interior silence. The arrest comes on the morning of June 10, 1540. The venue is the Privy Council chamber in Westminster, the body that Cromwell himself redesigned, whose procedures he wrote, whose membership he has substantially shaped over a decade of careful placement. He enters expecting a routine meeting. The Duke of Norfolk is waiting. Norfolk stands when Cromwell enters, not in greeting but in accusation. He charges him before the assembled councillors with treason and heresy. The other men in the room, men Cromwell has worked alongside for years, some of whom owe their positions in this very council to decisions Cromwell made, sit in silence. Not one speaks, not one rises to object, not one meets his eyes. The silence is comprehensive and devastating and completely predictable to anyone who has ever watched how men behave when power turns. Cromwell tears off his chain of office and throws it on the council table. It is an extraordinary gesture, half fury, half acknowledgement, and it tells you something that no document in the record quite captures. He has always known at some level that the chain was borrowed, that it was the king's to give and therefore the king's to recall. That everything he built, every office he holds, every instrument of power he has assembled, rests ultimately on the continued permission of a man whose affection for any individual is as reliable as English weather in March. He throws the chain because he knows, in the moment Norfolk stands, that Henry has already decided. He's taken to the Tower of London through a back passage, not through the main gate where state prisoners of consequence arrive, not by river the dignified route, the back way a service entrance, essentially chosen with deliberate precision by men who have waited years for this moment and intend to extract from it every possible gram of symbolic humiliation. London does not see Thomas Cromwell brought to the Tower as a great man fallen from grace. London sees him arrive as what Norfolk and the Howard faction have always insisted he was, a commoner who forgot himself, being returned to the appropriate level. But here is what no one tells you about the mechanism of Cromwell's destruction. The legal instrument used to convict and execute him is not a trial. There is no jury. There is no presentation of evidence to a court. The charges are never tested against a standard of proof. Cromwell is destroyed through a bill of attainder, a parliamentary declaration of guilt that bypasses the entire judicial process, convicting him by legislative vote rather than legal verdict. This instrument was used before Cromwell's time, but it was Thomas Cromwell who standardized it, who refined its procedure, who built it into a reliable and efficient tool of state power, who used it to destroy people he could not convict through normal courts because the evidence was thin or the charge would not survive proper examination. He used it on Anne Boleyn in 1536. He used it on others. He kept it sharp, kept it ready, kept it available. And now the Howard faction uses it to destroy him because the evidence against him, when examined closely, does not support a charge that would survive trial. He built the weapon. He honed the blade. He never, apparently, imagined the hand directing it. From his cell in the Tower, Cromwell writes, "The letter he sends to Henry is the most revealing document in his entire archive, more revealing than any of the perfectly controlled official correspondence that fills the state papers. It is rambling. It is desperate. It repeats declarations of loyalty with the urgent repetition of a man who knows he is not being believed and cannot stop himself from trying anyway. It begs, the man who never begged. The operational genius who built a machine that crushed everyone who stood against it, sitting in the Tower writing a plea for mercy to the man whose instrument he was, discovering, too late, that the machine has no loyalty to its builder." Tower Hill, July 28, 1540. The sky is the particular flat gray of a London summer morning that has not decided whether to be warm. The executioner is reportedly inexperienced. The first blow does not kill, the second does not kill. Contemporary accounts suggest it takes multiple strokes to complete the execution. It is a botched, prolonged public death, and Cromwell's enemies will describe it afterward with a satisfaction they make no serious effort to conceal. This too is a message. This too is designed. He speaks on the scaffold before the axe falls. He says he dies in the faith of the Catholic Church. This is almost certainly not a genuine theological conversion in the final weeks of his life. It is a political calculation, his last political calculation designed to soften the charges against him, remove the heresy accusation that would have complicated the inheritance situation for his son Gregory. Even at the end, he is working the system. Even at the end, he says what the situation requires. On the same day Thomas Cromwell's head is separated from his body, Henry VII marries Catherine Howard. The timing is not coincidental. It is a statement. The old problem disposed of, the new happiness commenced. The king does not mourn, he never mourns people he has killed. It would require acknowledging that the people he killed had a reality independent of their usefulness to him, and Henry has never found that acknowledgement comfortable. Cromwell's head goes on a pike on London Bridge facing south toward Putney, the blacksmith's boy from the South Bank looking home. The world he leaves behind is utterly unrecognizable from the world he entered. The monasteries are gone. Their land is in new hands. The new landowners, gentry families, court favorites, merchant investors who bought dissolved properties at favorable prices, have an economic interest in the Reformation being permanent that has nothing to do with theology, and everything to do with the fact that their wealth depends on the dissolution never being reversed. They will spend the next century defending Protestant England not because they are pious but because they are solvent. Cromwell, in redistributing the monastic land, has created an entire social class whose continued prosperity requires the maintenance of the world he built. The Reformation is now self-sustaining. It does not need him. It never did after a certain point. He built it to run without him, and it will. What did Thomas Cromwell actually win? His son Gregory lived, that is something. Gregory was elevated to the peerage Baron Cromwell of Oakham and died peacefully in 1551, a minor noble of no distinction, a man whose most notable quality was that his father's catastrophic end did not destroy him. Thomas's nephew Richard also lived, served the regime, prospered in the modest way that men survive great storms by staying low. The name endured. But consider the specific human inventory of what Cromwell's project required. Thomas More had been in some genuine sense his friend. The relationship between the two men was not warm in the way that friendship between men of wildly different social stations is usually not warm, but there is real evidence of mutual respect, of a quality of intellectual engagement that goes beyond professional utility. More dies in July 1535. Cromwell visits him in the Tower in the weeks before the execution. We have no record of what is said. We have only the outcome. More is beheaded, and Cromwell continues. The monks, not as an abstraction, as specific people. The Charterhouse monks in London, some of the most accomplished men in England, die across months in 1535 in progressive stages of atrocity. Their prior John Houghton, the first English martyr of the Reformation, is killed in April and his arm nailed above the Charterhouse gate for his brothers to see every time they pass through it. Cromwell knows. It is happening within a mile of his office. He does not stop it. 800 monastic establishments, 10 to 12,000 monks and nuns dispersed with pensions insufficient to live on, into communities whose social infrastructure, the hospitals, the schools, the poor relief, was the monastery. The dissolution creates measurable increases in poverty in areas surrounding closed establishments. Contemporary observers document this. Cromwell reads the reports, he files them, he does not change the policy. Did he care? The question is genuine and unanswerable in any clean way. His personal interventions in individual cases, a monk he intercedes for, a community he allows extra time, a pension he improves in a specific instance, suggest a man who can be moved by the particular. But the aggregate, the scale, the pattern that he does not question, not once in any surviving document. He is one of those historical figures, genuinely rare but genuinely real, who can hold profound concern for individual people alongside complete indifference to abstract suffering at scale. It is a cognitive arrangement that makes very large projects possible. It is not admirable. It is, however, extraordinarily productive, and the productivity is the legacy. The great irony of Cromwell's vision is that he did not build what he thought he was building. He thought he was constructing a strong, centralized monarchical state, a system in which a capable crown, guided by professional administrators, could govern England rationally and efficiently. What he actually built were the preconditions for the exact opposite. The parliament he empowered to make the Reformation legal became the parliament that would eventually break the monarchy entirely. The principle that parliamentary statute overrides all other authority in England, which Cromwell established to serve Henry's needs, became the principle that put a king's head on a block in Whitehall in 1649. He built the engine of his own project's undoing, and he built it to last. Pull back from the 16th century, look at the world you live in now. The Church of England exists as it exists, as an established church, with the monarch as its supreme governor, with its bishops sitting in the House of Lords, with its legal status intertwined with the constitutional fabric of the British state, because Thomas Cromwell decided in 1532 that a property argument was more durable than a theological one. There are approximately 85 million Anglicans worldwide today. The Church of England runs 4,700 schools in England and Wales, educating nearly 1 million children. All of this flows directly from the institutional structure Cromwell established in the 1530s. He was not building a religion. He was building a property regime and a constitutional arrangement. The religion grew inside the structure he designed. The land distribution of England, who owns the countryside, which families hold the great estates, which names appear on the title deeds of the most productive agricultural land in the country, was substantially and permanently shaped by the dissolution of the monasteries. The families who purchased or received monastic land in the 1530s and 1540s became the political and social class of Elizabethan England, of Stuart England, of Georgian England. Many of them hold that land today. The great landed families of the English countryside are, in substantial part, the beneficiaries of Cromwell's 4-year liquidation exercise. The Privy Council that Cromwell reshaped into the operational center of English governance evolved, through several intermediate forms, into the modern cabinet. The Secretary of State's office, the position Cromwell himself occupied and defined, building it from a personal household appointment into an institutionalized office with permanent staff and defined functions, is the direct ancestor of every government ministry in England: the Home Office, the Foreign Office, the Treasury. All of them trace their institutional lineage back to the administrative architecture Cromwell built in the 1530s. When a British minister chairs a meeting, receives a departmental brief, signs a submission to cabinet, they are operating within a framework that Cromwell designed. The furniture has changed. The procedures are the same. Parliament's sovereignty, the principle that parliamentary statute is the supreme law of England, overriding every other source of authority including the monarch's personal prerogative, was established in its modern practical form by the Reformation statutes that Cromwell drafted and managed. The Glorious Revolution of 1688, which permanently settled parliamentary supremacy over the crown, is built on legal and constitutional precedents that run directly through Cromwell's Reformation Parliament. The Westminster model of parliamentary democracy, exported by the British Empire to dozens of countries, forming the constitutional basis of governments in Australia, Canada, India, New Zealand, and many others, has, in its DNA, the work Thomas Cromwell did in the 1530s. And then there is the deepest legacy, the one invisible precisely because it is total. The idea that governance is primarily administrative rather than personal, that the state should operate through defined institutions, standardized procedures, and paper records rather than through the authority of whoever currently holds power. That offices should have defined functions persisting across the individuals who occupy them. These are today the foundational assumptions of every functioning government on Earth. They feel obvious because they have been obvious for so long that we have forgotten they were once invented. They were invented in England by Thomas Cromwell. Walk into any government building today. Look at the briefing papers and committee structures and filing systems and the formal procedures for managing decisions. That is not bureaucracy as an accident of scale. That is an architecture. Someone designed it. The designer is Thomas Cromwell, still running the show from a desk he left in 1540, through systems so durable that 5 centuries of political revolution have not substantially altered their basic operating logic. Cromwell didn't serve the king. Cromwell built a machine so powerful that it made the king a passenger in his own country, and then built it to run without him, without any specific him, without anyone whose death or removal or catastrophic personal failure could stop it. The blacksmith's boy from Putney never got the title, never got the dynasty, never got the monument or the statue or the official recognition. He got a botched execution on Tower Hill and a head on a pike facing south toward the river, but the machine keeps running. The meeting rooms keep filling, the briefing papers keep circulating. The committees keep meeting and the minutes keep being recorded and the procedures keep being followed in every government building on every working day, in every country shaped by English constitutional tradition. And the next time some official stamps your form in triplicate and explains that the system requires this documentation before any action can be taken, you are inside Thomas Cromwell's mind. You are moving through the architecture he built. You are living in the world he made from nothing with nothing, for reasons he took to his grave on Tower Hill with the same controlled precision he brought to everything else. You have absolutely no way to opt out. He made sure of that, he always made sure. If this is the kind of history that keeps you up at night, subscribe. We'll be back.